Hey you witches, how you doing today? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Taya, and today we're talking about sloth. As part of the Witch's Black Lent, I've chosen to work with sloth, or I think a better, maybe a more accessible term is laziness. Very pejorative term in our culture. To tell somebody that they're lazy is a horrible insult. And we're going to get into why. So this is week 2, and today we are supposed to create a poem using your selected sin as a theme. So this is the Witch's Black Lent weekly challenge from Jasmine Ambrosia. And I wrote a poem, but first I want to share with you a few things that have come up for me this week. I really delved into some research about sloth, about laziness. Where does it come from? And what are its benefits? So, the first one is phenomenal. I'm actually really tempted to buy this book. It is by Devon, who's a Ph.D., and he wrote a book called Laziness Does Not Exist. And this excerpt from his book is called The Racist Exploitative History of Laziness. So, I'm going to read to you a little bit from this excerpt. So the word lazy first appeared in English around 1540, and even back then it was used in a judgmental way to refer to someone who supposedly didn't like work or effort. When we say someone is lazy, we're saying they're incapable of completing a task due to physical or mental weakness. But we're also claiming that their lack of ability somehow makes them morally corrupt. They're at once incapacitated, but somehow also to blame for it. So, this laziness culture came specifically to the United States, but I think generally to North America, through the arrival of the Puritans, who had long believed that if a person was a hard worker, it was a sign that God had chosen them for salvation. So conversely, if a person couldn't focus on a task at hand or couldn't self-motivate, it was a sign that they had already been damned. So there was no need to feel sympathy for people who struggled or failed to meet their responsibilities. It was their own damn fault. Basically, those people were displaying to the world that God hadn't chosen them for heaven. And this religious idea about laziness caught on and spread to, as he puts it, other less pious colonists. So basically it just spread into the general population outside of just the Puritans. Because colonial America relied on the labor of enslaved people and indentured servants. And they needed to find, the wealthy and enslaving class needed to find a way to motivate enslaved people to work hard, despite the fact that enslaved people had absolutely nothing to gain from it. In addition, they needed to ideologically justify the existence of slavery, because many of the people of that period recognized, as we do today, that it was a morally abhorrent institution. So here's this wealthy enslaving class needing to justify, why are they enslaving these people? So this system taught that if an enslaved person was slothful, resistant, or lazy, there was something fundamentally corrupt and wrong with them. Enslavers made it a point to keep enslaved people as busy and exhausted as possible out of fear that idle time would give them a means to revolt or riot. And this is the key. He's actually got this bolded in his article. This worldview became the foundation for American capitalism. The laziness lie had been born, and it would quickly be pushed onto other marginalized people, including indentured servants, poor white laborers, and Native Americans. The wealthy aristocrats adopted a belief that idle time was only suitable for the rich and cultured, a sign of their superior minds and their more restrained passions. And eventually, the wealthy and highly educated began to claim that poor white people also couldn't be trusted with idle time. They often claimed that if the working poor weren't kept busy, they would resort to crime and drug use. That's a huge societal systemic belief that we still hold today, right? That if the people aren't kept busy, they'll resort to crime and drug use. Laziness had officially become not only a personal failing, but a social ill to be defeated, and it has remained that way ever since. There's quite a bit more to this article. I will link it down below in the description if you want to check it out. Really, really interesting. Devon Price, The Racist Exploitative History of Laziness. And another thing I came across while I was, thinking about laziness was the benefits of laziness. And this is a really interesting article by Anne-Laur Cunff, who basically says, once you step away from moral judgment and focus on its most basic definition, laziness is simply the disinclination to the use of energy, personal energy, right? Being lazy can actually have advantages, and many of them are backed by scientific research, right? Because we know that this idea that it's somehow you're morally corrupt, right? This is the patriarchy speaking, people that are telling you this idea that if you are lazy, you are morally corrupt, right? That's the patriarchy and capitalism working hand in hand. So here's her 10 ways that laziness is beneficial. Number 1, lazy solutions are smart, right? The light switch, the remote control, escalators, smart speaker, right? Laziness has been the source of many innovations. Later in the article, they go on to say, it's the lazy people who invented the wheel and the bicycle because they didn't like walking or carrying things. Number 2, slacking off can be a form of active procrastination. Active procrastinators prefer to work under pressure and make a deliberate decision to procrastinate. They have greater control of their time, their coping mechanisms, and their overall performance. So just because you procrastinate, you're lazy, doesn't mean that you're not a high performer. Number 3, lazy people focus on high leverage activities. They tend to avoid unnecessary tasks and instead focus on performing high leverage tasks that have a minimum input but a maximum output. And sometimes that will lead to them automating monotonous and time-consuming activities. Number 4, unproductive time helps us manage our stress. And this is particularly true of teenagers, right? Unproductive time helps us cope with stress. Number 5, being lazy makes you less prone to burnout. By taking regular breaks, lazy people will give an opportunity to their body and their mind to recharge and thus avoid burnout. Number 6, lazy time encourages diffuse thinking. So we have 2 modes of thinking, the diffuse mode and the focus mode. We need to maintain a balance between the 2 modes in order to be our most creative and productive. So letting your mind wander, diffuse mode, sometimes leads to non-obvious solutions. So sometimes we need to think that way. Number 7, laziness can be good for our mental health. So they kind of define this one by the flip side, saying keeping very busy can be an effective defense mechanism for warding off disturbing thoughts or feelings and not having to process them, right? By resorting to manic-like behavior, we suppress the truth of our feelings and concerns, consciously or unconsciously avoiding periods of uninterrupted, freely associative thoughts. Do you ever know that person who, just keeps themselves constantly so busy. And it's like their badge of pride. This is how busy I am. How can people just sit around all day? Da, 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 da. Because they're so busy all the time, but it makes you wonder what they're running away from, what they're trying to avoid. Number 8, being lazy is a way to recharge our energy stores. There's extensive research showing the benefits of taking daytime naps and regular breaks, from lowering your blood pressure to clearing your mind. Number 9, problems can solve themselves if you leave them alone for long enough, either because someone who needs a solution more badly than you do will take care of it, or because the problem itself becomes obsolete. Sometimes choosing to do nothing, that's a choice, right? To just say, I'm not going to do anything, and we'll see how the situation resolves itself. Number 10, laziness can be a helpful symptom. So the feeling of laziness, when we feel lazy, our body and our mind are communicating important information, right? It could be telling us that we're tired or hungry, or maybe it's telling us that we're lacking motivation. So we can look at, is the task boring or repetitive? And sometimes just acknowledging a feeling of laziness can be a great way to better approach the task at hand. So I have really enjoyed doing a bit more research on laziness, on sloth, especially in that pejorative sense, right? And it's fascinating to read about where it came from and to acknowledge that it has some benefits. It's not all this like, oh, you're lazy, you're going to resort to drugs, and there's so much more to it. It's so much more nuanced than that. So I wrote an ode to sloth. Sloth, you are lazy. You make my head feel hazy. I snuggle and snooze, even though I have everything to lose. You're like a drug that I take, feeling like I'm floating in a lake. You help me delay all the actions of my day. You drive a wedge in my life, ultimately leading to strife. But I cannot give you up, so let's have just one more cup of tea that's gone cold by my inaction so bold. So that is my ode to sloth. I wouldn't classify myself as a slothful person, but I think to a lot of people, if they looked at my lifestyle, they would classify me maybe as lazy. A lot of my mental health issues. I have ADHD, and I get overwhelmed, sensory overwhelm very easily. So I can only do so many things in a day, and I take a lot of breaks between everything, and there's a lot of shame in that. So I'm trying to sort of embrace this, that, I understand why I am the way I am, but I also realize that other people who look like, when my husband's at work, and literally this is always what happens when he gets off work early, he walks in the door and I'm sitting on the couch having a cup of tea watching YouTube videos, because I just finished my morning work, and it's like I take a half-hour break, and then I take the dog for a walk. And inevitably, that's when he walks in the house, is when I'm sitting on the couch watching YouTube videos. And he's like, oh, what have you been doing all day? And I'm like, not this. I promise, I've been productive. I'm not slothful and lazy. But I am, but I am consciously, choicefully choosing what many would consider to be lazy. But part of it is I need time to process my feelings, to process all that sensory input, to process what's going on in my life. And what happens is I don't get overwhelmed, and I don't get burnt out, and I don't, I have this one friend who is like, go all the time. And it's like, to her, it is almost like she is morally superior because she is so busy all the time. And nobody understands how busy she is. And I laugh because I'm like, oh, she must just think shit about me, because I am not busy all the time. This woman runs 7 errands a day, plus cleans her house, makes dinner, does the laundry, does all the things. I don't understand how she hasn't collapsed into a ball of stress. But it is. She calls me on the regular and is like, I'm quitting. I hate my job. I'm quitting, and I'm so stressed out and nobody understands. And I'm like, that is not a nice way to exist in the world. And I choose not to exist like that. I don't think that that's better than living a very intentional, very comfortable life where I don't take on more than I can handle. And it's okay to say no to people. And yeah, so there's a lot to explore there. But that was my ode to sloth and some of the benefits of laziness and where this concept of the pejorative of laziness came from. Shocker, it's a Christian, patriarchal, capitalist, made up thing. So I know for me, it's still taking a lot of deprogramming, decolonizing my mind, so to speak, to really wrap my head around the fact that it's not a bad thing. Sloth, laziness, it's not a bad thing. You're not morally bankrupt. It's actually it can be a force for good in your life. So anyways, I've been rambling. That's our video for today. Do you have experiences with sloth and laziness? I would love to hear about them in the comments below. Let's support one another and revel in the fact that we can choose to mindfully do less, and that we won't judge each other for it. All right, that's our video for today. We'll catch you in the next one.